Hello, 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 and welcome to the Anti-Racist Enneagram Podcast with Jessica Denise Dixon, where we look at life and healing at the intersections of the Enneagram, anti-racism, and embodiment for personal and collective liberation. Let's go.
Not trying to get by.
Trying to get by.
I'm trying to get free.
Trying to get free.
Hey, hey, hey. So today let's talk about an important aspect of culture. Now, for context, in the US, the Thanksgiving quote holiday was just quote celebrated. Now, the story of Thanksgiving has historically been whitewashed. What we learn in schools growing up usually is not the full picture, is not the full story. People who have faced erasure, like the indigenous peoples of this land, um, the the stories of people who have been colonized, who have faced imperialism, they don't get to tell their stories. They don't get to tell their stories. Um, this time of year is complex, and it actually should be. It should be. We don't have to run from the complexities of anything, of any holidays, of any celebration. Um, this is why some participate in what others would call Thanksgiving as an Indigenous Day of Mourning. And mourning is important. It's tied up with gratitude in ways that define our humanity. Mourning is extremely important. And so, along with giving thanks, mourning it's crucial that we integrate it. But, that's kind of a conversation for another day. First, today, in this podcast, let's talk about culture. Our culture is the values, beliefs, attitudes, behaviors, values. I already say that. Assumptions, the norms that we have, the things, the ways that we're socialized. And when I teach on culture, one of the aspects that I teach on is shared beliefs about historical events. These things are one of the aspects, one of the characteristics that shape a culture. And this is not just what happened in the particular event, but this is how we as a culture and as individuals make meaning of a particular event. This is the impact of the event, like what we believe about the impact both on ourselves and others. And I noticed recently, that where history has been encouraged, pushed to be taught full out, there's a lot of pushback from people. And when people actually learn more of the true history, people actually see the world differently. Now, this is an aspect of our culture that we don't necessarily spend enough or a lot of time really thinking about, really focusing on, but it shapes us in big ways. Now, we can choose to stay ignorant about other perspectives. We can choose the whitewashed picture of things, and some people really are committed to like keeping their narrow perspective. But weaponized ignorance is not a good look. And some people think that ignorance is the same as innocence. And when I look kind of at the etymology of these words, things get interesting. Because one interesting thing about the etymology, which is kind of the root, when you look at the root of where our words come from, innocence, one of the definitions from that etymology is of disinterest. And it's disinterest along with harmless and blameless. But now it's really only associated with this sense of purity, with this, when we're innocent, we're pure. But when it's weaponized, it often actually goes back to that definition of disinterest. Ignorance is this lack of knowing, but one of the older definitions is actually the connotation of the act of ignoring. So not just I don't know, but I'm going to intentionally choose to ignore. And when I look at that, I think that that's an important thing. Both of these are active decisions. Both of these things, innocence and ignorance, can be weaponized. Choosing to ignore, choosing disinterest as a way to maintain purity. That's all privilege, my guy. If you can do that, that is often you're coming from a place where you hold privilege. And when we start to learn something new, it changes how we see the world. If some people hold on to a whitewashed picture of what the first Thanksgiving was, if Indigenous perspectives are erased, then the meaning of this holiday, it's going to be different for different people. Indigenous people are still here, and they know that that cute story that we hear about is not the whole picture. It's not the whole picture. So shared meaning about historical events. Who gets to make meaning? Who gets to give meaning? The dominant group gets to hold the overarching story that shapes our society. The overarching story about how we make sense of it. A rapper named Lecrae almost broke the internet a few years ago on 4th of July because he mentioned and had a picture of Black people picking cotton. And he mentioned that his ancestors were enslaved on the day that we were supposed to be celebrating freedom. Now, that's true. Slavery was not over. It was not over at that time. But acknowledging it actually changes what our conversations about freedom really, like, what is freedom? It changes that conversation. And it's an important conversation. So just like it's important for us to look at what are the non-whitewashed details of what an event that's historical were, it's important for us to look at what are the power dynamics at play. Who holds privilege? Who's been marginalized? What violence, threats of violence, or loss did those Indigenous folks face? Not just physical, but yes, physical, but verbal, emotional, psychological. Who benefits from stories told the ways that they are? Is willful ignorance truly bliss, or does it split the soul? And we all have to look at the ways that we choose willful ignorance. It might be around certain emotions, certain emotional expressions, certain power dynamics due to privilege or the hierarchy that we feel or the power that we want to hold. It might be around our relationship to our body. We might ignore certain realities, family dynamics, trauma that we haven't resolved, but we really don't want to look at. These things shaped us as individuals and on the collective. Our Enneagram type has things that our ego structure will auto avoid. They automatically turn away from: pain, failure, weakness, imperfection, even your own self, depending on our type. Although I do think all the types do point to the ways that we turn away from ourselves. We turn away from our wholeness, and no matter what type. Now, Resmaa Menakem talks about how trauma decontextualized becomes culture. It becomes family culture. It becomes overarching culture. It becomes internalized as, quote, the way things are, and the ways that we're socialized. Often what's considered biology or the mind is internalized culture. So we each have our own part in reshaping culture by actually being open to a full perspective, by saying, this is what the whitewashed version of the story is. What might have the other people been experiencing? What might they have felt? What might have been the reasons that they chose to make the decisions that they did? And so we start to reshape culture when we do that. When we do that, we start to change things, right? If internalized culture is thought of as mind, as the way things are, as the way, the world is, When we change our minds, we change culture. And when we do change our minds, we'll need to embody these things in our nervous systems. Because our nervous systems don't necessarily hold objective truth, but they hold what they believe will maintain our status quo enough to make sure that we don't get hurt in different ways. Our beliefs live in our nervous systems. And so the things that we believe about big events, how we make sense of things, how we make sense of the world, that all is going to live in our nervous systems. So if we only are changing our minds and we're not actually embodying these new beliefs, it's going to actually be hard for us to live into our new beliefs. Now, Otto Scharmer talks about 4 levels of listening, and I actually think it's really important to this conversation and to conversations about liberation. The first level of listening is listening for what we know. So we hear, maybe we turn on a podcast and we listen for the things that we can agree with, the things that we already have known, that that makes sense to us. The second level of listening is to listen for what is novel, to listen to what we don't know, to listen to what sounds unique or fresh. The next level is empathic listening. Here we feel into the energy, the emotions, and the other context that's present as we're listening. And then there's generative listening. This is the 4th level. And this is where we allow ourselves to actually be changed by what we're listening to, where we know that we cannot be the same anymore because of what we've just heard. We allow ourselves to have innovative vision, a different perspective, and then different action actually flows from this. And here is where we start to co-create worlds. Now, I think that the first 2 are kind of our default patterns, right? They come easier. I listen for what I know, I listen for the default, or I listen to what I don't know, so I can fit that into what I do know now. But the last 2, we have to put the work in. But it's worth it to me. To me, it's very much worth it for us to examine, for us to look at these other ways of listening. Can we feel into, can we stop objectifying people and understand that lived experience is a form of expertise that's valid. So when we're listening to people, how can we listen from that place? So, as we are made aware of things from a broader perspective than a quote traditional storytelling, the way we listen and integrate this is going to make a difference. The way that we listen and integrate this is going to impact and fuel our ability to correct misinformation. And this gives us the important, vital, but subtle steps in reshaping culture and to be actually much more honest truth tellers. And with honesty often comes grief. With truth telling comes reconciliation. Like, how do we reconcile the stories we've been told with the stories that have been intentionally erased? These are the things that we must face. And I promise that we can handle more than we think. There has been a reason that we have avoided this, but it comes at the cost of our souls, and it comes at the cost of our humanity. So liberation is the reclamation of all that we are, all that we were made to be, the things that have been stripped from us, the things that have been pulled apart, so that white supremacy can be upheld. And it's up to us to reclaim, to rewrite, to reshape. That's what we're here for, to co-create something new, generative, and beautiful. So that is it for this episode. Of course, always, always from love and for liberation. Peace out.
Not trying to get by. I'm trying